Back in the spring of 1994, I went camping with a small group of friends in Suches, Georgia, a bit off the beaten path, with a short hike in. It was a nice place. Primitive but with defined, large, heavily wooded campsites. Upon my arrival, one couple, good friends of mine, was already there. As I came bounding in, all jovial and enthusiastic, I immediately noticed something was off. My friend Kate was giving me big eyes. And as I looked around, I saw her husband Ted standing by the tents with some dirty, David Koresh-looking dude. Kate whispered out of the corner of her mouth, "This dude won't leave us alone." I tried to understand what was going on, and it seemed like he was just some lonely guy out in the woods by himself, and we were unlucky enough to be his neighbors. As the day went on, he kept trying to insert himself into everything we were doing. Not only that, but everything he did was just weird. For example, while we were prepping for our big dinner, always a highlight of our trips, he brought over his cooler to show us his dinner plan, which was literally a steak floating in bloody cooler water with a couple of beers. By this time, a couple of more friends had shown up as well. As we were setting out our food, sort of buffet style, since everyone had pitched in to bring and prepare something, camping fabulous, for the meal, here he comes chair in hand, all wet and muddy, like he had just crawled up the riverbanks. The sites were far enough apart that we had time to do a quick huddle. We decided Ted, who's a big guy and made the first contact, would tactfully and politely ask him to respect our space. Ted explained that our meal had been carefully planned and we were just looking forward to hanging out as a close-knit group. Surprisingly, the guy got the message and seemed a little embarrassed. It was a no hard feelings, see you around kind of vibe. We all felt relieved, and even a little sorry for him. As it got dark and we were sitting around the campfire, stuffed and having partaken in various calming vices, suddenly out of the darkness and into the firelight comes our neighbor. We immediately went silent as he plopped down in front of the fire. Then we all noticed, at the same time, that he was loosely holding a giant Desert Eagle pistol in one hand, with his finger resting on the trigger. We froze, staring at him for what felt like an eternity. Then he said, as casually as could be, "Anyone want to check out my piece?" We just sat there, stunned. Finally, my buddy Dave broke the silence, saying, "Nope, no thank you." The guy shrugged, said okay, got up and sauntered back off into the darkness. He didn't seem to have a flashlight or anything, which totally freaked us out because we didn't know where he was, until about half an hour later, when his campfire suddenly flared up with flames at least 7 feet high. There he was, hopping around the fire, naked, as far as we could tell from that distance, periodically dumping more gas on the flames from a gas can. It was about half an hour of pure insanity. And just like that, it had ended. Not a sound after that. We all stayed up pretty late that night, and I don't think any of us slept without one eye open. The next day, when we got up, there was no sign of him, except for a melted red and yellow plastic gas can. We ended up staying another night and had a great time, but I'd be lying if I said we weren't all a little on edge for the rest of the trip. Last night, my girlfriend's sister and I went down to the river beach near my college. My girlfriend and I do this frequently, but yesterday my younger sister came to visit for the night, so we decided to take her to the little beach by the river that runs through campus. We planned to have a fire and hang out. There's about a 10 to 15 minute walk through the woods to reach the beach. On our way down, we stayed on the trail and had no issues. We spent about an hour and a half on the beach before deciding to head back and watch a movie in my girlfriend's and my dorm. However, when we tried to leave, we lost the trail. The ground was covered in leaves, making it hard to follow the path. An important detail is that there's a clearing where power lines run, almost halfway between the beach and the street, at the start of the trail. This clearing is full of tall grass and prickly bushes, and it's difficult to cross unless you're on the one trail that goes through it. A little before we reached this clearing, we lost the trail. We decided to walk straight towards the clearing, thinking we could follow its edge until we found the trail again. Since it was dark, we all had our phone flashlights on, and my sister was even playing music on her phone. Eventually, we found the clearing and began walking along its edge, searching for the trail. My girlfriend was a few feet behind my sister and me when, over the music, I heard a branch snap from deeper in the woods. I told my sister to turn off the music and started scanning the area with my light. At first, I didn't see anything. When my girlfriend asked what was wrong, I said it was nothing and continued looking for the trail. I was still feeling uneasy, so I kept scanning the direction of the noise. That's when I noticed something white with what looked like ears standing very still. It was about 15 to 20 feet away, and I couldn't tell if it was an animal or something that just resembled one. I didn't mention it at first, thinking my eyes were playing tricks on me, especially since I couldn't see any eyes reflecting my light, which is typical for animals. It was also unnaturally still, which made me doubt what I was seeing. I moved my light for a second, and when I shone it back in that direction, the thing was violently swaying back and forth. I said, "What the hell is that?" and turned around as my sister screamed. I've never heard my sister sound so scared. I yelled at both her and my girlfriend to run. We bolted straight through the tall grass and prickly bushes until we reached the other side. My sister fell and lost both her shoes. I helped her up and told her to forget about the shoes, and we kept running in the direction we thought the trail was. Thankfully, we eventually found it and didn't stop running until we were out of the woods. When we made it back to the street, we calmed down and started talking about what had happened. I was the first to see it, and I knew something was wrong when I saw it swaying like that. It looked unnatural, almost limp, like a slinky. It didn't seem like something a person could do. After I turned to look for the way out, both my girlfriend and sister saw it too. They said it started charging at us while still swaying in that creepy way. I hadn't seen it charge at us, so learning this later made the whole experience even scarier. We also never saw its face, or fully made out its shape. My girlfriend and sister said it was running on two legs, upright, like a person, but moving in a way that didn't seem physically possible. None of it makes sense. We've been trying to come up with an explanation ever since, but nothing fits. To make it even stranger, my girlfriend mentioned that when we first got to the beach, she heard someone walking in the woods behind her while my sister and I were busy starting the fire. This might be completely unrelated, but the thought of someone, or something, watching us the whole time is really unsettling. One of the scariest moments I've ever had was during an annual fall campout with my search and rescue team. It's meant to be a retreat where we do some training, hang out, and bond as a team. One night, during a training session, my dog, who was trained for cadaver detection and man trailing at the time, alerted to a scent. We followed it deep into the darkness. Eventually, we reached what seemed like a creek bed, slick and uneven. That's when I slipped and took a nasty fall. I slid down a small cliff and ended up breaking 2 ribs and getting a concussion. I managed to press the emergency alert on my GPS, signaling the base camp that I needed assistance. At that point, I noticed my dog had disappeared, leaving me alone and barely able to breathe. A little while later, I heard footsteps approaching. Then, out of nowhere, a strange man appeared. He started talking in an unsettling way about how often people end up in the creek and how dangerous flash floods can be during hurricane or tornado season. Something about him was just off. He began looking for a way to climb down toward me, and I was in no condition to defend myself. But then, I heard it my dog. He's part Aussie, and he has this unique way of communicating with trills, awoos, and rolled arroos. It was his hurry up, slowpoke noises, and he was close. The guy looked in the direction of the sound and seemed to change his mind about coming down. Moments later, one of our team's other dogs, a massive German Shepherd, appeared. He's usually soft and sensitive, but this time his hackles were up, teeth bared, growling at the stranger. The guy backed off, and that's when my dog Brody arrived and did the same. Soon after, 2 of my teammates showed up. One was a former Marine officer, and the other was a professional MMA fighter. The stranger just stood there, watching as they worked to stabilize me. The dogs never let up with their growling and threat displays. even as my teammates called for the backboard and wheelie, a device that attaches to an ATV to transport people out. This guy just watched. Once we got back to camp, the medics cleared my neck, though I still had to be taken to a rural hospital. While there, a nurse mentioned that the area where we'd been training had a high number of assaults, both physical and sexual. To this day, I fully believe that if Ranger, my dog, hadn't shown up when he did, that could have been my fate. I'm still involved in search and rescue and have plenty of strange stories, but nothing quite as disturbing as that night. Brody has long since retired, and Ranger is getting close to retirement, too. I still don't know what scent Brody was following that night, since the training wasn't set up in the direction we ended up going. We filed a suspicious activity report with the police, but as far as I know, nothing ever came of it. In the summer of 2022, I was desperate and frustrated. After quitting my job to pursue a startup that wasn't thriving, the pressures of fatherhood and financial strain weighed heavily on me. My wife and I had finally welcomed a daughter after 6 years of IVF, but I was feeling the burden of being the sole provider. I needed a break to clear my head. I planned a 2-night trip to a remote lake about 3 hours from home, one of my favorite spots. I packed my gear, leashed our 2 blue heelers, and set out early one Tuesday. When I arrived at the trailhead, the parking lot was empty, perfect. The 5-mile hike up the canyon was peaceful, and I didn't see a soul. By midday, I reached the lake. It was pristine and quiet, with no one around. I set up camp on the east side, where snow had blocked the trail from going further. After fishing and gathering supplies, I headed back to camp, exhausted and ready for a fire. But something was off. My pack, which I'd hung on a limb, was now 20 feet away with a large eagle feather on top. The dogs growled, but no one was there. Outside my tent, someone had carved a symbol into the dirt, 2 connected U-shapes, like a Native American petroglyph of a bird. It was fresh. Someone had been there, yet there were no footprints, no sign of a person on the trail, and no other car at the trailhead. My stomach dropped. I felt watched, but couldn't see anyone. That night was a nightmare. Strange sounds echoed through the forest, yells, shrieks, branches snapping. The dogs growled and barked. But when I shone my flashlight into the woods, nothing was there. At one point, I woke to the dogs growling and slowly unzipped the tent, thinking I might catch whatever it was. I turned on my flashlight, and there, just 3 feet away, stood a doe and her calf. Behind them, a whole herd had wandered into camp. When the dogs barked, the deer spooked, crashing back into the forest. As the noise faded, I heard deep laughter, which turned to crying, then to a menacing growl, louder than anything my dogs or even a bear could make. I spent the rest of the night clutching my dogs, sleep impossible. As soon as dawn broke, I packed up and left. I've never been so terrified in my life. I grew up in Ohio in the 70s, and my childhood friend Joe and I spent every possible moment outdoors. Joe lived on a farm that bordered a large forest, and my parents would drop me off in the morning, letting us disappear into the woods for entire weekends. We'd only come out for school. We loved playing frontiersmen, building shelters, setting traps, and trying to make fire with sticks. By the time we hit high school, we got the idea to pull off a Stand By Me adventure, inspired by the movie of the same name that had just come out. Instead of looking for a dead body, though, we'd walk the railroad tracks in the countryside, looking for bridges to fish from and camping just off the tracks. Sure, we knew it was dangerous and probably trespassing, but we were kids. It turned out to be a blast. We found beautiful rivers, stumbled upon hidden bridges, fished, and even hid from passing trains. At night, we'd camp in the woods, make small, hidden fires, and feel like we owned the world. Nothing bad ever happened. It was idyllic. We loved it so much that we did it several times without a hitch. After high school, Joe and I went our separate ways. We left home but stayed in touch, always coordinating visits when we could. One summer in the mid-90s, we both found ourselves back in town for about a week. During the day, we'd spend time with our families, and at night we'd catch up over beers around a fire, reminiscing about the good old days. One night, we started talking about our Stand By Me trips. Nostalgia and beer are a dangerous mix. Soon enough, we decided to relive those adventures just one more time. The plan was simple: walk the rails for a day, camp for a night, and head home the next morning. On the day of the trip, my wife dropped us off at the old spot where we used to start, right outside our hometown. She thought we were nuts and made sure to say so before driving off. Joe, always the adventurer, suggested we take a different route this time. heading in the opposite direction. We knew the area well and had a map, so I figured why not. The day was fun, if a bit bittersweet. We found a bridge, sat on the edge, smoked a joint, and carried on. Without fishing gear, we settled for canned food, and as the sun began to set, we scouted for a campsite. We picked a thickly forested area that felt like a tunnel, with trees on either side of the tracks. Before setting up our hammocks, we decided to scout the perimeter, just like we used to do, making sure we weren't camping in someone's backyard. We walked about 100 feet into the woods and up a small hill. From the top, we saw an old building down below, barely visible through the trees. It was about 100 yards away, hidden deep in the woods. At first, we thought it might be a sugar shack. There didn't seem to be any road leading to it. No movement, no lights. It looked abandoned. Curiosity got the better of us, so we cautiously walked closer. That's when we realized it wasn't a sugar shack at all. It was an old church. The building looked like it had been abandoned for decades, with sagging, moss-covered wooden planks and a cross on the roof, weathered black. The windows were shattered, and there were no doors, just open doorways. Inside, we could see rows of rotting pews and a raised platform where the preacher would have stood. There were no footprints, no signs of life. It was completely deserted. Uneasy, we backed away and returned to our campsite. Having a hill between us and the church helped us feel a little better. But there was still an undeniable creepiness hanging in the air. It was dusk by then, so we set up our hammocks and decided to call it a night, planning to leave early in the morning. As darkness settled in, we lay in our hammocks, chatting quietly. That's when we heard it. Do you hear that? What the hell is that? It sounded like singing. We both slid out of our hammocks and crouched down, listening. The singing was faint but unmistakable, coming from the direction of the church. We decided to sneak up the hill to get a better look. The moon was out just enough to see by, and we crept through the woods, quiet as we used to be in our younger days. When we reached the top, we saw flickering light coming from the church, candlelight by the look of it. And the singing, soft, haunting, was coming from inside. We crouched there, whispering in disbelief. The singing wasn't in English, and we couldn't make out any words. Occasionally, shadows passed across the candlelit windows, but we couldn't see who or what was inside. We were too far away and had no intention of getting closer. Then the singing stopped, and a booming voice echoed from the church. It sounded like an old preacher, but in a language we couldn't understand. The voice would chant, and then a chorus would respond in song. This went on for a while until they all erupted into a long, eerie wail that sent chills down my spine. Just as I was about to suggest we leave, Joe grabbed my arm. "They're coming out," he whispered. We watched in horror as a line of figures emerged from the church, holding hands in single file, flashlights bobbing erratically in the dark. They began singing again, and the lights started moving toward us, straight up the hill. We bolted. Grabbing our gear, we ran to the tracks and sprinted in the direction we had come from. After a few minutes, we stopped and looked back. The lights were still coming down the hill, moving wildly. We kept running, stopping only when we reached a road. By our map, we knew there was a small town nearby, and we made our way to a 24-hour gas station, where we called my wife to come get us. When we told our friends and family what happened, they all laughed it off as kids messing around. But I know what I heard. Those voices weren't kids, and whatever was happening in that church, I never want to find out. Thank you for watching.